Hello my friends, I am Lux Noctis, and today we're going to talk about environmental storytelling. As I always like to use a specific example when I put these things together, this video will focus on Bloodborne. More specifically, why it succeeds in this regard, and how we can apply some of its methods to our own work. So, to begin, Bloodborne is a third-person, dark fantasy action RPG, developed by From Software and released in 2015. The entire game is drenched in a deep and foreboding atmosphere, and its story deals with elements of both gothic and cosmic horror in a way that's never been done before, at least as far as I'm aware. The city of Yharnam, in which much of Bloodborne takes place, is steeped in lore. It has many stories to tell, and tends to do so with minimal exposition and dialogue, so let's take a look at what we can learn purely through observing the world in the early part of the game.
You found yourself a hunter.
We begin in a clinic, which has a huge amount of lore significance in and of itself. A woman hides behind a locked door, and if the unsettling quiet and the scattered bodies weren't enough to tell you something's wrong, the lycanthrope that greets you by the exit will definitely bring that idea home. So right in this very first building, we're taught much about the state of Yharnam. In fact, if you break it down to its simplest form, in a sense, much of the city is just these details scaled up. People are hiding, many are dead, and you have an example of what they're afraid of trying to murder you about 7 seconds into your playtime. Just as a side note, I think it was a really great choice to put the injured werewolf front and center first. Because, for the sake of balance, after this point we face a bunch of easier, far less intimidating humanoid enemies as we learn the game's mechanics. Take a second to consider how the impact of the intro would have been lessened had that particular beast not been there, and we had instead just walked outside to face the first of the maddened townsfolk. Anyway, this is Bloodborne's surface-level environmental storytelling, and is, in this case, tied to the gothic horror elements of the game. There are beasts, there's blood, almost everyone you meet seems to have gone mad, and the clinic relates to the potential cause of it all. However, for the observant, the more insidious elements of the lore are already clearly on display. Take for example the statues with their eyes covered. There's a reason this is so, just as there's a reason many locations and characters are of religious significance. These aspects of the story become more clear later on, as you meet people who flesh out the details for you, giving you pieces of a puzzle that will never quite be complete. But it's interesting to look back and realise that evidence of those lore points has been woven through the city streets since the very first moment you stepped outside. This kind of attention to detail even extends to the game's mechanics. For example, many of the beasts you encounter, the ones who can still see at least, are afraid of fire. And you only have to look around to understand why these creatures might have reason to fear the flames. I won't delve any deeper into the story itself. There are a ton of lore videos out there that already do that way better than I could. The point I wanted to convey is that there are details everywhere that give context to, and are evidence of, the underlying narrative. Now I want to discuss why it's so successful in conveying a story in this way. Earlier on, I described this method as giving the audience pieces of a puzzle that will never be complete. And in the case of the audience, that statement is true. The reason it's often so easy to fail this kind of approach as a creator, however, is because people want their world to appear vague and mysterious, but fail in regards to consistency because they never crafted the full story in the first place. If we try to build an incomplete story, then plot holes will inevitably crop up. And then the entire fiction breaks down, becoming a nonsensical mass of conflicting events and ideas. As writers, we need to understand the events in the world fully, then see which details can be made obscure and which can be entirely hidden without the story falling apart completely. It's a very difficult balance to strike, but paring back a complete tale is a far better approach than trying to string out fragments of an incomplete one. There is, of course, a risk of going too far in the other direction, and being so proud of your own work that you end up adding too much. But this kind of storytelling really relies on the people crafting it making the smart decisions when it comes to such things. Now let's say we have the full plot in our minds, and the fictional universe is a complete enough picture in our heads. How would we go about implementing that into an environment in such a way that details in a location can speak to the audience? Well, in the most basic terms, environmental storytelling is a simple matter of cause and effect. We're seeing the effects of events we already understand. As the creator, we only need to think in straight lines in this regard. For example, in the world of Bloodborne, incense seems to have the power to ward off beasts. You'll see it in the cathedral ward, and you'll see it burning outside of the homes in which residents you can speak to are hiding. As a player, we have to figure this out by reverse engineering the situation. We hear that the homes with incense have people inside, whilst the ones without seem devoid of life. As the person creating that story, it would appear to be an obvious thing though, because they already have it established in their fiction that without the incense, there's nothing keeping the monsters at bay. Therefore, those who are lacking it would already have met with a terrible fate. This is a very modest example, and if anything, it might seem too simple, given the grand weaving narrative that lies under Bloodborne's horrific surface. But it's important to remember that complexity is something that develops from simplicity. Even the most perplexing machine is made up of base components. As a creator, the environment we describe, or the one we build in the case of a movie set or a game, should always be answering questions and conveying information. Why is this woman's body here? Because she tried to save a husband who was already too far gone. And what was with all the imagery pertaining to blindness anyway? Pay close attention as you play, and you'll gain a little insight into that too. If you really flesh out your world, you'll have woven your own twisted tale in no time, and you'll be able to tell your audience much about it without boring them to death with monotonous exposition. I am Lux Noctis, and this video was way longer than I expected. Catch you next time.